Hi, I hope you all are doing good. So I'm recording this lecture for the students who were absent on Thursday after Eid. And before Eid, we had actually done an example which was very generalized on alphabets A, B, C, D, A, B, C. So, and the pattern was not meaningful. So it was a bit confusing as well. But after Eid, the example which we had covered in the class was based on a meaningful pattern. Gulsher, name of one of the student of your class, Gulsher, right? So I have designed a finite automata for this pattern, right? But we will walk through this example step by step. So the first step will be is to identify the alphabets within our pattern, right? And within our string or text as well. And basically, what is the problem? The problem is we are performing a string matching through finite automata, right? So the alphabets which we have identified from the pattern and from the text is actually are G, U, L, S, H, E, R. So these are the alphabets which are used in our pattern as well and also in the text. So first thing, we identify the alphabets. In the next step, what we need to do, we need to design finite automata for the correct pattern. For the correct pattern, the Gulsher, I mean the pattern in which we are interested. So as we have identified the alphabets, so we need to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 alphabets. So I have designed 7 states for the 7 alphabets, and one state as an initial state or the input state where we will input our string, right? And then the finite automata will try to identify the pattern within that string. So now let's assume we have this example or this string and we are inputting this string into our finite automata. So what will happen is that we have input this string. So the first alphabet is G. So as within the initial state it reads G, so for G we have a determined state which is 1, so it will transit to that state. So from on G it will transit to 1 state where G is dead, right? So now we are currently into the G state. So within the G state, the string we have recognized, or the string which is recognized by the finite automata, is G, only G. So now after G, let's assume that the correct alphabet occurs, or the U, which is U. By the correct alphabet, I mean the alphabet in which we are interested, right? So after G, we are interested in U. So if U occurs, so from 1 we will transit to the second state. It means within the second state the recognized string will be GU, right? So within second state, I mean the 2 state, which is I have marked as 2, if L occurs, it means the correct alphabet occurs there. So if L occurs, so we will transit to the third state, 3, and the recognized string will be this one, GUL. And then we will assume the correct possibility of the occurrence of S. So if within the third state S occurs, so we will transit to the state 4, and now the recognized string will be GULS, right? And then when we are in the fourth state, and we will assume the correct occurrence which is H. So what if H occurs? So if H occurs, we will transit to the fifth state, and we will have this GULSH string is recognized. And if again the correct alphabet occurs, so within the string, so then we will transit from the fifth state to the sixth state, and we will have this. And then if R occurs, then we will transit to the final state, which is 7, and we will have the complete string Gulsher, and the pattern is recognized, right? So all this is for the correct possibilities. If on in each state the correct alphabet occurs, so we will transit like from one state to another, and then another, and we will reach the final state. But we all are aware that there are possibilities that instead of U other alphabet occurs. So then what will happen, right? So we need to look for the solution if those alphabets which we do not desire to occur they occurs. So what we need to do, so in that case, so what we can do is, like, if within the first state we have already recognized, or the finite automata has already recognized G, so what if another G occurs, then what will happen, right? So if another G occurs, we need to identify the prefix and suffixes, and the prefix and the match prefix and suffixes will tell us that where we need to roll back, right? So let's do this through the example. Let's say we are in the first state, G has already occurred, and then again another G occurs. So what will happen? So now we have this string, right? Calculate the prefix and suffixes of this GG, right? So we have the prefix G and the suffix G. So for forming suffix and prefixes, so prefix we form prefix from left to right, and we form suffixes from right to left. So from left to right we have only one character or one alphabet, so this is G. We do not take the complete string, right? GG. So if we take GG, so we are taking again the string, and the result will not be accurate, right? So we do not need to take GG. So the G is a prefix now, and then from the right to left we have G, which is a suffix. So as you can see that these prefix and suffix are matching, and the length of this prefix and suffix is 1. So this G will be dealt by the state 1, right? So the G will itself loop back to the first state, which means it's looping back to itself. So what will happen is the G will loop back here within the first state, right? Now we have studied the possibility for G, but there are other alphabets as well. What if instead of G, one G has occurred, but instead of the other G we have the possibilities like let me list down the possibilities first. No, U is the correct one, so if U occurs, so it will transit to the second state. But what if G occurs? So it will loop back to itself. But if instead of G we have L, S, H, E, R, then what will happen? So if after G L occurs, so we will have the string is GL. We need to form prefix and suffixes of this string now. So if you now we are forming the prefixes, so we have the G, this is the prefix. Now starting from the right to left, right? So suffix, we have L. So these two are not matching now. So if they are not matching now, so where we need to roll back, or which state will deal the L now. So there is no state on the left side of 1 which can deal L, and the prefix and suffix are not matching as well. So what we can do is the finite automata will roll back to the initial state, right? The finite automata will roll back to the initial state, and we will write this L here, that if after G L occurs, it will roll back to initial state. Now we have studied the possibilities for L as well. Now what if instead of L we have S, then what will happen? So we need to study this possibility as well. So if S occurs, so G is already recognized, so we will have the string GS. We will form prefix and suffixes. So similar to L, the prefix and suffix will not match. This is prefix and this is suffix. So G is different than S and S is different than G. They are completely different alphabets. So they are not matching. We need to roll back to the initial state from the first state. If one G has occurred and then S occurs or L occurs, then we will roll back to the initial state. Right, so on L and S. So I have written this into capital so it is much clear that it is L, right? So on S we will also roll back to the initial state. Similarly for H we will also be roll back into the initial state because the prefix and suffix will not match, and for E and R as well. So if 1G, what it all means to sum it up, right? The first state, it means that we are, let me start it from the initial state. We are in the initial state, G has occurred, we are now, G has occurred, and there is a transition from the initial state to the first state. Now we are in the first state, 1G has occurred, and we are checking for the possibilities so that we could transit to the next state. So for the next state, the correct possibility is U. So if U occurs, we will transit to the second state. But if instead of U, L, S, H, E, R occurs or G occurs, so then what we will do, or what the finite automata will do. So if G occurs, so based on the match prefix and suffixes and its length, we will roll back to the first state, right? So or it's a loop back. We will loop back to the first state. So we are in the first state, we are looping back to the first state. So all the G's will be looping back, looped back to the first state, right? Now if we were checking for the next possibility, what if L occurs? So we are forming prefixes and suffixes of the GL. So they are not matching, so it means that there is no state which could deal L after G. So we will roll back to the initial state. Similarly for S, for E and R, we will roll back to the initial state, right? So this is how we have dealt all the possibilities for the first state. Now the correct alphabet has occurred, and we have now transit to the second state, which is 2, right? So within the second state, the correct recognized string is GU, right? So this GU, right? But what if now now we need to transit from the second state to the third state. So the correct possibility for the second state to transit to the third state is L. So if L occurs, we will transit from the second state to the third state. But there are also other possibilities. What if instead of L we have other alphabets, which are G, U, S, H, E, R. If L occurs, we will transit to the third state. But what if instead of L we have G, U, S, H, E, R? So we need to study the possibility of G. What will happen if G occurs, right? So for G, what we can do is, now if instead of L G occurs, so the string will be GU. If L occurs, we will transit to the third state. But what if instead of L we have G? Then what we will do? So now we need to calculate the prefix and suffixes, right? So prefix, we will start from the left to right. So G is one prefix, GU is another prefix. So we have two prefixes. Now similarly suffixes, right? So we will start from the right to left. So we have G and then we have UG. Now we need to identify the prefix and suffixes which match, right? So which matches, so the prefix and suffixes which are matching are these two, GG. The length of the prefix is 1 and the length of the suffix is 1, so it means that we need to roll back to the first state. If within the second state, let's say here in the second state GU has occurred and again G occurs, so what will happen, based on this identification and based on the matching of G and G, we have identified that we will roll back to the first state. To this state, right? If we are in the second state, GU has already occurred and again G occurs, so instead of transiting to the third state, we will roll back to the first state. And how, on what basis we have decided that what we will be roll back into the first state, based on these prefix and suffixes, right? Now moving on, we have studied the possibility for G. Now we need to study the possibility for U. So for U, so now the string will be GU. GU has already occurred. If L occurs, we will transit to the third state, but instead of L, if G occurs, what will happen, we will roll back to the first state. But what if U occurs, then what we will do? So we need to repeat the same process. We need to calculate the prefix and suffixes, right? So the prefix will be G and GU. The suffix will be U and UU. So now we need to identify the matching prefix and suffixes, right? We don't have any matching prefix and suffixes in these two pairs, right? So if we don't have any matching prefix and suffixes, so it means that we currently don't have a state to roll back to, right? So what we will do, we will roll back to the initial state, right? So we will roll back to the initial state here. On what value? Alphabet. We will roll back on alphabet, roll back to the initial state on alphabet U, right? Now we have studied the possibilities for G and U, but what if S occurs? What will happen? Is there a state which could deal the S? No, there is no state before 2 which could deal S. So what we will roll back for the S, we will roll back to the initial state for the S as well, right? S. You might be confused at how we've decided that we are roll backing to initial state on S. Let's check the possibility for it. Let's assume, but actually GU has occurred. If L occurs, we will transit to the third state. If instead of LG occurs, we will transit to or roll back to the first state. But if U occurs, we will roll back to the initial state. But what if S occurs? What will happen? We need to again perform the prefixes and suffixes, right? So G and GU are the prefixes, S and US are the suffixes, right? So no prefix and suffix is matching, so we don't have a state to roll back to currently. So where we can roll back to the initial state, right? So we are roll back into the initial state on S. So similarly, we will roll back to the initial state for H and E and R, because the prefix and suffixes will not match. So with U and S, we will write the other possibility as well. We will roll back to the initial state on H, we will roll back to the initial state on E, we will roll back to the initial state on R. So we have, you know, dealt all the possibilities for the second state, which is 2, right? Now the correct alphabet has occurred, and now we have transit to the third state, from the second state to the third state. So it means that after GUL has occurred, we have transit to the third state, and now we are into the third state, which is the string which is recognized is now GUL, right? So it is GUL. Within the third state, the string recognized is GUL, GUL, GUL. Now we need to study all the possibilities for for the third state. So if S occurs, we will be transiting from third state to the fourth state. But what if instead of S, the other possibilities occurs, right? So what are those other possibilities? Okay. So GUL, the string GUL is recognized, right? So GUL is recognized, and after L, we are exploring other the possibilities for the other alphabets, right? So if S occurs, we will transit to the fourth state. But what if instead of S, G occurs, U occurs, R occurs, H occurs, E occurs, R occurs? So then what we need to do? So we need to study the possibilities for these alphabets, right? So we have G, U, H, E, R, and L. We have not included S because on S we will be transiting to the fourth state, right? So now the recognized string is GUL. But what if after L, G occurs? Then what will happen? So now we need to form the prefixes and suffixes, right? So prefixes for this string is G, GU, and GUL, right? And now the suffixes will start from the right to left. G, LG, ULG. So now you can see that the prefix and suffix matching are G and G, and its length is 1. So it means if we are in the third state and G occurs, we will be roll backing to the first state. Right? So we have studied the possibilities for G. But what if instead of the correct S and the incorrect G, U occurs? Then what will happen? So GUL is recognized, we are in the third state. If S occurs, we will transit to the fourth state. But what if instead of S, G occurs? So we will roll back to the first state. But what if instead of G, U occurs? Then what will happen? So we need to form the prefix and suffixes. So G, GU, and GUL suffixes are starting from the right to left: U, LU, and ULU. Which string is matching? Which prefix and suffix is matching? None of them are matching. You can see that G or U not matching, GU not matching. So then what we need to do? So we need to do is to roll back from the third state to the initial state, because we do not have a state on the left side which could deal this substring or this substring. We do not have a state on the left side which could deal with this substring, right? So that's why we need to roll back to the initial state. So from third, when u occurs, we will roll back to the initial state. If u occurs, we will be rolled back into the initial state, but if we are rolled back into the initial state on u, so this will hold for h as well, this will hold for e, and this will hold for r, and this will hold for l as well, right? So we will be rolled back into the initial state on u, h, e, r, l. Right? So let's find out that how we are rolled back in to the initial state for L, because we have a state on the left side which could deal L, but still we are rolled back into the initial state. So we need to check its validity. So GUL, and now instead of U, or let me start it from the beginning. We are in the third state, GUL is recognized. If S occurs, you will transit to the fourth state. But if instead of instead of SG occurs, so we will roll back to the first state. If U occurs, we will roll back to the initial state. But what if instead of G, U, H, E, R, L occurs again? So what will be the string? This will be G double L. Then what we can do? We need to calculate the prefix and suffixes. So prefix G, GU, and GUL. Suffix starting from the right to left, you have L, double L, and U double L. So these are the now. So find out the prefix and suffixes which are matching. None of them are matching in these. None of them are matching. So we don't have a state which could deal this situation GU double L. Right? So that's why we are rolled back into the initial state. Okay, now we are in the third state. GUL is recognized. GUL is recognized, and now S occurs. So as S occurs, we will transit from the third state to the fourth state. And now the recognized string is GULS. Right? Now we need to study the possibilities after GULS. Right? So I will do it here. Right? So I will do it here. So now the correct string, or the string recognized, is GULS. So after GULS, if H occurs, we will be transiting from fourth state to the fifth state on H. But we can get the other possibilities as well. And what are the other possibilities? Let me list them down. The other possibilities are G, U, L, S, E, R. We have not listed H because if H occurs, we will be transiting from the fourth state to the fifth state, right? So now we need to check for these possibilities. What if these alphabet occur? What we need to do, whether we need to roll back to the initial state or to some other state, right? So first we need to check for the G. GULS, this string is already recognized. We are checking the possibilities for transiting from the fourth state to the fifth state. Yeah, so if H occurs, we will be transiting from the fourth state to the fifth state. But what if instead of H, G occurs? Then what will happen? So we need to study this possibility. We need to perform prefix and suffixes. G, sorry, stopping the comma. GU, GUL, GULS. These are the prefixes, not suffixes. calculating the suffixes starting from the right to left: G, SG, LSG, right, and ULSG. Find out the prefix and suffixes which are matching. Which one are matching? These two. Prefix and suffix. G, this one is G, this one is G. So they are matching. Its length is 1. What we need to do, roll back to the first state. Roll back to the first state. Okay. For G we have roll back to the first state, but what if U occurs? Right? So we need to study this possibility as well. GULS is already recognized. If H occurs, we will transit from the fourth state to the fifth state. But what if instead of HG occurs, G will now roll back to the first state. But what if U occurs? Then what will happen? We need to form the prefix and suffixes. So prefix G, GU, GULS, right? So the prefixes are formed. Now we need to form suffixes, and they're starting from the right to left: U, SU, LSU, and ULSU. You can check that none of the prefix and suffixes are matching. So what we need to do, we need to roll back to the initial state. Right, so if we are roll backing on U to the initial state, so we will be roll backing similarly for L, S, E, and E and R as well, right? So now design this arrow on a roll back to this, right? So U, L, S, E, and R. We are roll backing from the fourth state to the initial state on these alphabets. But now let's assume the correct alphabet has occurred. The correct alphabet is H. It has occurred, and now we will transit from fourth state to the fifth state. Right? So we will transit from the fourth state to the fifth state, and now we are in the fifth state, and the string recognized in the fifth state is GULSH. So now after GULSH we need to study all the possibilities. If E occurs, we will transit from the fifth state to the sixth state, right? But what if instead of E the other possibility occurs? Then what we will do, right? So let's list down those possibilities. So I will do them here, right? So the string currently recognized is GULSH. If E occurs, we will transit to the sixth state. But if instead of E other alphabet occurs, then what we will do, right? So we need to study the possibilities for the incorrect alphabets, right? So those are G, U, L, S, H, R. I have not written E because on E we will be transiting from the fifth state to the sixth state, right? But just keep in mind that currently we are in the fifth state, right? And the recognized string is GULSH. Alright, now if, as I said, GULSH is recognized, on if E occurs, you will transit to the sixth state. But what if instead of EG occurs? What will happen? You need to calculate prefix and suffixes. But let me tell you that the prefix which will match is G and G. G and G, similarly here G and G, and from here we will be roll backing to the first state as well, right? Here, right? So let me draw the line. G we will be transiting to the first state. In all the remaining characters or alphabets, we will be transiting to the initial state, right? So now I don't need to write them, but to draw them, because this will become too messy. So what I need to do is roll back to the initial state, right? And I'll write is similar to you, similar to you. So U is rolled back into the initial state, so L will do the same, S will do the same, and H will do the same, and R will do the same, right? Now we are lucky and E has occurred, and we will be transiting from the fifth state to the sixth state, right? So now as we reach to the sixth state, the recognized string will be GULSHE. We need to study the next possibility. The next correct possibility is R, and on this we will transit from sixth state to the seventh state, and our pattern will get recognized because this is the final state, right? And I hope it will be clear now to you. But let me do an example here. The string recognized within the sixth state is GULSHE. It is recognized. If R occurs, we will transit to the seventh state, which is the final one. But what if instead of R, the other possibility occurs? Then what will happen? The other possibilities are the alphabets other than R, right? So we need to check for those. The other possibilities are G, U, L, S, H, and E, right? If G occurs, if it means that if the string becomes GULSHEG instead of R, then what we will be doing is we will roll back on this string. We will roll back to the initial to the first state, because G and G will match in the prefix and suffixes. If GULSHE U occurs instead of R, then what will happen on U? So it will roll back to the initial state, and then similarly on L, GULSHE L, it will roll back to the initial state. GULSHES, it will roll back to the initial state. GULSHE SEH will roll back to the initial state, and similarly for GULSHE we will roll back to the initial state, right? So now the correct alphabet has occurred, that which is R, and now we are transiting from sixth state to the seventh state, this one right here. Now the string Gulshir is recognized, but what if this, we did the example for this text, but what if after Gulshir there are also alphabets? There is again L R S H, like this one. Then what we will do? So this pattern is recognized now, but after this we have again L. So what we can do is, now we need to identify the possibilities then we need to calculate the prefixes and suffixes, and based on the match prefixes suffixes length, we will roll back to that state. How? Let's say we are in the 7th state. Already this pattern is recognized. We have identified that 0 1 2 0, let's this is a string and it's represented in array. So 0 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, sorry, 0 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. On 9 index our pattern started to be our pattern is started, and then from 9 10th 11 12 13 14 15. So our pattern within this string is located from index 9 to 15, I guess, right? So then obviously if this is a string, so we can have multiple patterns in a string. Means the word can be repeated or the pattern can be repeated. So we need to check for the remaining text as well, but the remaining text includes L. So what if L occurs? Then what will happen? So this is recognized. The string is accepted, but within the final state we have GULSHERL. Now what will happen? So the prefix and suffixes will not match, and we will have to roll back to the initial state, and then the same process will begin again, right? So starting from the first state to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, the roll backing, and unless we have another pattern found in the text, right? So this is how it works, and I hope it will be now clear to you all. I will share this diagram as well in the video. So I have tried to explain it in a very easy way, but still if you have question you can ask in the comments.